Let me bring this up here. Uh, Good morning to everyone. Today, we have the privilege of hearing Leah's story of her lost childhood. Uh, we may hear some bad things in this story, but I always remember with joy the fact that we can hear Leah tell it in person and that we all get to know Leah being here in the United States with us. So with that said, Leah, please tell us some more about your youth.
Thank you. Well, first of all, that's the first day in the United States. We were on a ship called Marine SS Tiger, which had been a troop ship, and now it was for displaced persons. So we came from Germany, and that day, there's a man in the back, he's a Lutheran minister, and the woman on the left is representing UNRWA, which was another relief organization. But the best part was with this particular picture, there were 3 families on the ship chosen by the Saturday Evening Post. And when it was final, we were the ones chosen, the Estonians. The others were Latvians and Lithuanians. So we never knew why. We assumed my mother was a young teenager in Estonia in 1910s when she already learned English. And then, of course, we both learned it in Germany and when we were displaced people. So what happened was, as you probably know, those of you who know me, I'm talkative. I was apparently talkative at age 16 because I told the Saturday Evening Post writer that my aunt had come from Sweden recently to United States. So this was like noontime. And guess what? By evening, by about 6:30, that was my aunt. This is America. Things happen. They can find you. And she was wearing a fur coat, and we were not suspicious. We knew she was borrowing it from somebody. But 5 months later, cousin Lia was born. And we Estonians didn't want to flaunt it that, we were expecting a baby. And I probably should tell you about what happened to them, then I'll go to my own. What happened was this way. My father and his 2 sisters had organized to get a fisherman to take us to Sweden because the Russians were coming back the second time. We knew that would be my father would be sent to Siberia or even killed sooner because of last time he was hiding. So so the boat was taken away by the Germans because they needed slave labor. So my one aunt never got out of Estonia. In fact, she stayed with her husband and they had 2 more children. But my Aunt Linda, she was able to go with her in-laws. And this is the story in my family that's probably the most heroic. Her husband was in the Estonian army. He was an officer. And when Soviet Union took our country in 1940, immediately he became the enemy for the Soviet Union, just like my father was, having been a policeman. So my uncle was sent to Siberia, but he was an officer and he was going to take care of things the best he could because he wanted to see his baby. His wife was expecting their first child. So he shaved, even though he didn't have proper equipment, but he had learned to carve. And he did like little figures this long, and they would be like a horse pulling a plow with a man. And because of this, he was able to trade it for a large potato from the prison guards, because the prison guards wanted to take these home as toys. And that's what kept him alive. They gave him very little food in Siberia. And all the men who were there, they had to just fell trees. That was their job. And and they didn't have food. So, but my uncle is a hero because he figured out immediately how to keep going. So when the Germans attacked Soviet Union, he figured out what to do. You see, Stalin had killed so many of his officers in 1930s, Russian officers, because he was afraid they might rebel against him and dispose of him and get rid of him. So he wanted to make sure he'd be a dictator forever. So now he's in war with Germany, and he doesn't have officers. He's missing them. So now they go to prison camp in Siberia and they knew which ones were officers, including my uncle, and they said, who would like to go to Russian army, be an officer? Well, my uncle was a thinking man. He knew then he could probably run over to the German side and get back home and see his wife and the new baby. So that's what he did. But even though I spent time with him and my husband and we visited him, he never quite explained how he managed to do this. Because you could also, if you were escaping from the Soviet army, you would be shot in the back. So he was able to avoid that, and he got home with the Germans. Of course, then when the war was ending, now he was in the German army and fighting the Russians, and he was totally separated from his family. My Aunt Linda went with his parents to Sweden. So finally he got to Sweden. But there's a little more story to this. I'm just going to tell you all that right now. You see, in Sweden, even though they were a neutral country during World War II, when the war was over, they started to make deals with Soviet Union. Any Soviet soldier that had, or officer that had escaped to Sweden, they gave them up to Soviet Union. And of course, once they were on the ship, they were shot. They weren't even taken home. They were shot because it's given up. So now the Estonian people, including my aunt and uncle, were really worried that what's going to happen to them. So 65 Estonians put their monies together. And some of them obviously didn't have much money, like my aunt and uncle weren't wealthy. And they put their money together and they figured, and they got a sea captain. He was a Finnish man, two professionals who knew how to sail, old sailboat. And the Estonians, none of them knew anything about it. They just hired these two people. And the idea was once they get to the United States, they might still be able to sell this old boat. And then from that money, they would continue paying the people that they owed money and make sure that the two men were taken care of. But God had other ideas. They got shipwrecked. And I think it was North Carolina, I don't remember where, and they were shipwrecked. So the first thing they get is the US Coast Guard. And guess what they told them? You either go back to the country where you came from, or you go to Ellis Island. Hey, Ellis Island! So they could stay. That was fantastic. So then they were here illegally, obviously. And this was October of 1948. So now they needed someone who really cared for them. And that was a congressman, I think from Long Island, New York, who got the law passed that these 65 Estonians, included some children, that they could stay in the United States. And the way my cousin tells me that even though they had this law and they were staying, once in a while someone would still try to send them back to Sweden, which wasn't exactly where they wanted to go. So now this is a man I just think he's a real hero, what all he has done, my uncle. And then when he came to the United States, he worked in a piano store, not playing the piano, but finishing. If anything had gotten a little bit damaged, and you remember when I made a donation in his honor. Yeah, and so he was just a great guy to think what all he went through, and he made it. So now let's go back to my childhood. Um, September 1st, 1939 is when my childhood went downhill. That's when Germans attacked Poland, which they have just done the other day with the drone. So history is repeating itself. So immediately we couldn't get any more. We had rations for sugar. We couldn't get oranges, which was a big deal. That came from Africa, and bananas. Couldn't get any more Shirley Temple movies, which was a big deal. My father was a policeman, and he could always get 2 tickets free. And so I got to sit on the lap, and it was dubbed in the Estonian language. So I loved Shirley Temple. And to tell you what happened after the war, and some of you might even know that, Shirley Temple was Shirley Black by that time, and she became the first ambassador to Estonia when it became free about 34 years ago. It was a real big deal. I mean, just really fantastic. So meanwhile, of course, as we all know, those old movies were released, so I've seen them all. Okay, so now let's go back. Immediately, we declared that we would be neutral, just like Sweden had. But Soviet Union had a better idea. They invited our leaders to Moscow. And they said, no, you can't be neutral. We need to have a non-aggression pact so we could protect each other. And of course, they had 170 million people to our 1 million at that time. So then also they insisted that we give them access to our islands so that they would have a place to put their boats, submarines, and whatever. And they didn't really say in the beginning, because when you have the Navy, you expect to be getting people from Navy, but they also smuggled over the border army. So, but we weren't quite aware of it at the time. And why we didn't fight was that our leaders didn't think we could do it, even though Finland fought Soviet Union and did pretty well. So now we have given up these naval bases. And I was 6 years old, so I really didn't know that much what was going on yet. But the next summer, when I was 7, in the summer, sun is shining, you look out the window, and there's this soldier walking like this with a rifle. And I said to my mother, who's that? It certainly wasn't Estonian. My mother said, that's Russian. They just took our country overnight because they had smuggled all these troops in without us being quite aware, and we didn't have enough strength to fight them. So there we were. So that meant now that the school, I was tested for early school, so I could start first grade. First grade usually was 8 years old, but I could be at 7. Well, schools didn't start for a couple of months, and I bet you can figure it out why. They had to rewrite all the textbooks because you couldn't be saying Estonia was wonderful when it was no longer, it was SSR, Estonia, SSR. So then by the time school started in end of October, instead of, some of you have taught in the Lutheran schools or you've gone to Lutheran schools and you may have seen a nice portrait of Jesus or God on the wall. Well, our hero was Stalin. Every room had a picture of Stalin. That was our God. Then in front of our children, there was like 50 of us in the music class, and all of a sudden, a couple of men came and took our teacher. He was a patriot, believed in Estonian independence. They knew he would be teaching some songs on the sly, which were rah-rah for Estonia. So he was gone. That was it. That was it. And that was, pretty tough. But also, when they took our country, anybody who had been in the government, like I mentioned my uncle already, and my father lost his job. He couldn't be a policeman anymore, obviously. So now he'd get these jobs, and then some ex-con would say, oh, Oswald was he was a policeman, so you got to get rid of him. So he would lose his job again. So it was a pretty rough year. And what helped us was that my mother's cousin's husband was a forester, and he could shoot venison deer and bring us venison, and that was good. Also, some of you will be very sad when I tell you the next, but we raised rabbits. We ate 65 rabbits, and I know when I mentioned this to pastor's Bible study, some people said, what? Well, they weren't pets, they were food, and that's what we ate. So now, I think I pretty much have mentioned the first grade. So each summer, we went to different families to, like we didn't have our own summer home. So my mother and I would always stay with some relatives. So in summer of 1941, I would have been allowed at age 7 to take the bus, and it was about 40 miles from Rockford to where my grandmother's farm was. And so it was first time I got to do this, which was a real big deal when you're 7 years old. Well, a few days later, something really horrible happened. My uncle, who was in the farm, he went to take the milk with the horse and buggy, to the dairy. And he comes back and he said, I don't know what's going on. They have these big trucks and they're filled with people. You see, Soviet Union made a list of 3,000 Estonians, men, who had to be taken to Siberia. But besides that, their wives and children were also going. And they were told to pack up, just take some clothes. And it was summertime. So who was thinking that they would be in Siberia in the winter? So they didn't have the correct clothes, nothing like that. So, however, remember I told you my father was a policeman, he was on that list. Someone knew about this. Apparently some Estonian would become a communist, but still liked my father, and warned him that, Oswald, you gotta get out of here because you're on a list to be going to Siberia. So my father rode his bicycle. It was about 40 miles. And no, 26 miles, excuse me. No, 40, excuse me. I'm getting the two figures mixed up. It's 40 miles. And so he rode all night without lights on because he was afraid, he'd be arrested. So then he came to my grandmother's farm and he hid there. He would sleep in a big barn during the night, but during the day he was way back there. The farm went way back and he would be hiding back there. He couldn't do any work because he might be caught. And so that's what he did. Now I had to learn to lie. I mean, you just don't want to learn that when you're 8 years old. By now I was 8. But we went to visit my mother's girlfriend, a lady like 20 years older. And the rumors were they'd seen my dad on the train, which was going past there with the prisoners. And they said, oh, people saw Oswald. And so have you heard about from him? And my mother said, no. And I had to shed a few tears to make it convincing, because you had to. You just couldn't say, just say, oh, well, my father's in the barn. I mean, I had to learn to lie, and it's not a good lesson to learn. And by now, obviously, religion was no. We had a church right near us in Rockford. in the Lutheran church, so we would still go on Sunday. But obviously, Soviet Union did not believe in God, or they just had Stalin. So from there, and the next year, that summer, then it was terrible because I get to the farm first time by myself, and all these people have been arrested. So next summer, we went to my mother's cousin's, and this was a totally different place. Her husband was a fisherman at the Baltic Sea, and they had a house they were still building. It wasn't quite done, but there was room for us. And what we had was a boat that belonged to Soviet Union that the Germans had gotten now. It was just a small boat, you know. And so everything was taken out of it, all the wires. And so it was not in the water, obviously. Otherwise, we may have gone away. We were actually on sand, and we would just play in it. The relatives had a son and daughter. The daughter was 2 years younger. The son was 4 years. And now let's go back to the son. He's visited us several times from Sweden. He became an EBM engineer. And so it was pretty exciting. First time again in the United States to training. I think it was in Texas. And so he got to visit us for about a week, and was really something. So then when my daughter Norma and I went to Estonia the first time, about 30-some years ago, we visited him and his family. And later on, well, now I'm going to much later dates, but later on we went back to Sweden from UK. Our daughter's husband had a job in UK, so we were there for a while. And so we went to visit, and his sister was supposed to show us the village where Bud's grandfather may have come from. Well, we get there, and turns out that his daughter, my cousin Daniel's daughter, had committed suicide. And it was like a month later, and they were burying her that day. We didn't even know her, so we didn't get to go to the village, but that was okay. Now let's go back then. It's just that when you come from a small country, we had a lot of relatives. And you probably don't think about it, but now you've left. So you lose all your relatives, just about. The only ones I have here is my cousin Lia. Guess who she was named for? Thank you for laughing. my Aunt Linda figured that Lia is, from the Bible, even though the Bible misspells it by Leah. And all the Lutheran ministers just love that. There's Marissa from Rocky River. She even went back to her church and said, I met your friend whose name is misspelled in the Old Testament. But it's true. Mine is just Lia. So that was the summer that I was talking about the Swedes. And I did see his sister once in Tallinn. We were visiting for the song festival, and she was there. And she's blind now, unfortunately. And then the next summer, things weren't so good anymore because the Germans started to lose the war. And they had many people who were injured. So what did they do? They took half of our schools away. They became hospitals. So as young as I was, I think I was 9 by that time, I was in the afternoon shift. And in the winter, by 4 o'clock, it's dark, and there I was going to school. It was pretty rough, but at least I had school. So that's what we did that year. And then the next year, my father came. My father got worried about us because the Germans were really losing the war by now, and the Soviets were coming back. And he was concerned about the bombing in the town where we lived. So he sent us to his cousin's house, and she had a very big farm. And my job every morning was to pick the eggs, and there was a lot of them, and weigh them. They had to weigh a certain weight, and they go to the store, and the rest we could eat. So that was my job. But I did go to school too. But that was already my life started to go really downhill because I was a city girl, and there weren't that many, there wasn't any farmers near me who had children my age. So I had to walk to school by myself. And I really didn't make any friends because it wasn't like we would be visiting. Everybody was worried about the war, the parents. So my only highlight of that winter was going cross-country skiing on the fields with the farm dog. And that was, I never forget that. It was just beautiful. The snow is glistening, and this farm dog is following me, and I don't even know the name it's been. But as we left Estonia, you see this farmer, this family was pretty wealthy, and they had a big area, which we would call a chicken coop. And so what my parents did, they dug underneath and they hid some of our valuables there. And hoping that, I guess we were hoping we'd be coming back real soon. Not sure. Well, there was always the talk America would help us, but that didn't work out too well. So anyhow, so that's what happened there. And my father comes in August of 44, after we've been in this farm since January. He said, "Mary," that's my mother, "we have to go now." And my mother says, no, I can't leave my mother. Even though we didn't even live near my grandmother, but she was, and I was an only child. So I said, well, I'm going with my father. So that was that. So my mother went with us. And a couple of times when she was unhappy in United States, she said, because of you, I'm here. But actually, my mother did quite well. She adjusted quite well here. But now let's go back. So what happened then at the end of August? We started thinking about when we're going to go and where. So we got on the train, but it was not the passenger train. It was the kind that, we'd have cars on right nowadays. And it was that kind of a train. And the Soviet Union decided to shoot us a little bit. So we had to jump off the train. The train stopped. And there was like a little place underneath the little bridge. And of course, being by now I was 11, and I wasn't very capable, apparently, because I left the family, my briefcase with my books and photo albums underneath there, which never got back, of course, because then we ran back to the train and we got all the way to the end, to the Baltic Sea, which was Haapsalu. And from there was a bridge, and we got to go to Saaremaa, where my father was from. And that's why we were hoping to get to go to Sweden. And I got to see my grandparents because I didn't really see them very often. And my father came from a huge family of 8 children, so I got to see many of them. So, like I told you then, we didn't get to go to Sweden, so we went to Germany. And that was an eye-opener. We always, I think many of you, just think Germany, Germany, Germany. And I've been there too, and I've seen the good parts. But in my heart, I still remember how bad things were. And I can't just say, oh, Germany, Germany, because it's not my Germany. I mean, I don't blame the German people. They were so poor too. They had nothing, and they got bombed just like we did. We were on the direct route 4 times a day, or night, depends. The Allies would fly over us. The Americans, the Brits, probably some of the French had survived. Half the France was still free and the other half was under Germans. So, I mean, when you have this coming, you don't know, you never get any sleep because you just don't know what's going on. And my father, his job was with a group of men, the police would take them on the train to clean up the debris of bombing, whichever it was. And my mother, 6 days, they both worked 6 days a week. And my mother worked in the kitchen at the railroad station, and she would just peel potatoes for 6 days. The Germans had so little food. themselves. And these potatoes were just cooked in the big buckets, and then when the train came with the soldiers, they get the big buckets and the empties be taken off. There was hardly any meat or anything there. I mean, my family then ate breakfast and dinner wherever they were working, so I was on my own, and we lived in this barrack, which was really scary. The one side, there was a paper factory, which was closed now, and that was something that gave me big joy because nobody was carding the old papers. So I found a lot of postcards, and even though some of them had that old German language, I couldn't really read it, but it didn't matter. I still have a few of them left from my souvenirs, and that was like my friends. And I was the only Estonian, and there wasn't anybody else, except next door, the other side of our barracks was ammunition factory. And see how God was good. If he hadn't been, I wouldn't be here, right? The Americans, either they deliberately missed it or what, but they shot for 2 weeks before they came. They were really doing a heck of a good job saving their men, you know. And so the director of the ammunitions factory had a daughter who was 8 years old, and I was 12 by now. And she was really nice to me. She gave me a loan of a book of saints. Having been a Lutheran, I had no clue what this was all about, but I knew German, obviously. I had learned it in the displaced persons. I mean, I had learned it from my mother. Actually, we didn't have the German I knew. It's just the British English that later I had to learn. So I could read it, and that was really nice. Well, what happened was, of course, her father was worried about his wife and child. So they were sent to a country somewhere, and so that was my playmate then gone. And the only highlight that I can remember of that year was Christmas Day. We had, like in Bridge Day, in some of the books you read, we didn't have built-in closets. We just had those steel closets. And these two, they were ex-prisoners of war, of French, and they were still living in Germany. They weren't allowed to go back somehow. And they came and they said, "We're gonna make you music." And they did. They just put their fingers against this wardrobe, steel wardrobe, and they made great music. And that's one of my highlights of that year because it was so beautiful. Besides getting the book of saints to read, you know, everything else was downhill. And when my parents were working, I had to go hide somewhere. So there was a mountain near us, and they made places for us to hide there. But then spring came, and now the water started to drip, you know, it was melting. So that was it, obviously. Remember, I told you I have no school. I lost my books. Well, I had already, and I had nothing. I had nothing to do, like the postcards helped me. So from there, finally, we were kicked out by the Germans from underground because they knew they were losing the war, and instead of trying to be nice to the displaced persons, they just kicked us out. So now we were on the ground, on the top, and thinking what to do now. There was 27 of us Estonians. So we found back there was a wine cellar, which was above ground with big stones. There was nothing in it. Furniture, yeah, everybody said, "Oh, wine." No, there was nothing. It was empty. So there we were. And I guess, you know, the Germans they could have been nicer to us, but they weren't. So I've gotten over it, but sort of. I'm still upset how we were treated. And the other worry, as a child I don't know about the adults. The Lahn River was right in the back, and it was getting higher and higher and higher. And I'm thinking, what if a bomb hits there and then all this water will come? But it didn't, because we Americans did a good job of not shooting the munitions factory. So now we had no food because Germans kicked us out, and we never did have a kitchen to use this. We would just cook the meal for us. So we had no food. So now what? So luckily for us, after the Americans had been shooting at everything, the train came and they got the engine. So the train couldn't go anymore. So the Germans, the natives, of course, went and raided the train, and we had to be careful, our men, because they might get shot at. We are ethnics, foreigners. So we waited till they were done, and then I went with my dad and some other Estonians, and we found food. You never guess what we ate for the next 2 weeks, but it was food. Grain of wheat, not flour, grain of wheat, and we had a can of syrup, and that's what we ate 3 times a day. Somehow someone had broken in the kitchen apparently and gotten this big pot, and so we had to have a fire outside, and it didn't rain, so that was good, and so that's what we ate. But I had told my mother when we first got to Germany that I did not believe in God, because how can God let this happen? Like the first Sunday, we went for a walk, the three of us, and next thing I know, the airplane is shooting at us. We didn't know, it was an American or whose plane it was, but someone was shooting us, so we never went back again for a walk. In fact, there was nothing we could buy. We didn't really have money, and there wasn't anything in the stores. And so we kind of kept to ourselves pretty much. We just couldn't go anywhere. It wasn't safe. So now when the Americans came there and after all that shooting, and we had survived by eating grain and syrup, the Americans had no clue. There was millions and millions of people in Germany that had been brought there. Now, some people like Bulgaria, Greece, they could go right back home, but we couldn't. And the Americans had a heck of a time understanding this. Poor to you, you just didn't understand why we couldn't go back. We would have been on a list to be murdered immediately. We fled to SSR. And so we couldn't go back. So we had to explain this over and over again, because the Americans would let the Russians, the people, to come and recruit us to go back home. So we couldn't do that. So finally, we got in peace with that. But meanwhile, nobody knew what to do with all these foreigners. I mean, the French occupation zone was even worse. They had nothing at all. Americans they could get food from home. Is this not good? Oh, thank you. Okay, now you have to listen to me. Oh, jeez. Jeez, thank you. Okay, all right. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. So what happened was they took the 27 of us, the Americans did, in a truck, and they found us a school to spend the night in, and we were given 3 loaves of French bread for our meal. That was better than nothing, right? And we didn't, and if you've been to France, they don't wrap it out in the paper like we try to wrap everything. You just get this loaf and don't know where it's been, but it was food. And so in another couple of days, then they was trying to still figure out where to take us. So we went to Kaiserslautern, which some of you might know. Yeah, there's see, I have to look at the map, and that's the one with the occupation zones. I believe, I can't even see it. So Kaiserslautern, we didn't stay too long. And finally, they found us a very beautiful historic place, Trier, which had been built by the Romans. And at the time when we were there, I mean, we weren't wandering around. We were just staying up the hill where we were supposed to be. So we really didn't find out some of these things, but they actually had, when the Christians were thrown to be, to be eaten and mistreated. And so we saw all that afterwards when we went to visit Trier later. But at the time, my father was always trying to get a job, and so he volunteered in the kitchen. And I'm so sorry I never asked him what he did there. He certainly couldn't cook, and I have no idea what he did. But the best thing was every Saturday he was given a large can of American coffee. So on Sunday, since my mother was pretty good in German, they went to visit the farmers, and they got food that we didn't have. What we had was, there was mostly men in this camp, and if there'd be 18 men, and then my mother and I at the table, didn't matter which end it started, that we just had nothing in the soup but gray water. I mean, we just didn't have anything. So, but we made it. So we did have an incident there, my mother and I. We decided to break away and go steal apples because we were up in the mountain and we didn't know who the apples belonged to. So why not? I mean, I remember I was lying by now, and why not? So we went to steal apples, and with that, 2 soldiers came. Now remember the French? French had soldiers in Morocco and some other countries, and so we really don't know where these soldiers came from, but they were from one of these other countries, and they offered us silk stockings. I was 13. Didn't know much about certain things, but I knew it was not going to end up too well. So my mother just said politely no, and we walked away, which meant that these men were brought up very respectfully. They did not rape or attack us because in some of the countries that's what happened. And so because of that, we made it. And then on this mountain, there was a prison camp. We found out my mother's cousin's son was there. You see what happened, we were at the railroad station about 1943 when he and his brother were taken to the German army. And they were both tall and blonde and certainly could pass for Germans. So what happened, one of them was taken into SS. So he had that insignia at his arm, so he could never leave Germany, but he married a German woman, he stayed there. But his brother got to go to Canada, and that helped. But I better finish this up. This is going, I'm not. So what happened, we're in Germany, and everybody wants to get a new life. And we're now in Schaffenburg, which is a different place. And in between, we're in Kleinneubach, which was a hunting lodge, but to us Estonians was like a castle. We didn't have that in Estonia. Yeah, oh my gosh, the time is up. So anyhow, so some people had, first they took men to work in the gold mines in Canada or coal mines in Belgium. And then some people were taken to Australia. And finally, United States passed an act with Harry Truman signing it 1948, October. And they were taking millions of displaced persons. The only problem was that you had to sign up what was your occupation. And the policeman wouldn't do for my father, so he said farmer, because when he was a kid, he worked on his father's little farm. Well, Estonian farm of many years ago, an American farm with 80 milking cows, and it just didn't work together. And so many people who came here with jobs, they just couldn't, they were just misplaced. I mean, we knew a judge who ended up being a butler in somebody's house. And, it just was hard. And so we didn't stay in the farm too long, couple of years, and then we found my father's worked in U.S. gypsum plant. But now I'm going to the end of the story. So I think that how I lost my childhood was that there just weren't that many highlights, if you noticed. I mean, everything was just dismal. And even though we lived in Estonia for a while, but there was bombing, the Russians were bombing. And of course, in the beginning, it was the Germans. And when the Germans came, my father had been hiding 2 months, so they were fine with that. But then my uncle had just gotten his law degree, and he came to say goodbye to us, and which I didn't know. Of course, they don't tell that to a child who might tell somebody. And he came to say goodbye, and he fled to Finland because the Germans didn't like his patriotism. You see, he didn't do enough for Hitler. So, and remember, in school, we have big Hitler's pictures now. Heil Hitler, right? So it was just, so my schooling was terrible. And by the time I was in Germany, I didn't go to school for 2 years, except the very end when we went to Kaiserslautern, to Kleinneubach, which was the hunting lodge. And there were enough Estonians, they started a little school. So they could see that I would be 2 years behind. So and this was the end of April, and school was done in June. So and maybe I was smart too, I don't know about that. But anyhow, they promoted me 1 year. So in the United States, there's some kids in college my age that, but usually I'm a year older since I didn't get to school for 2 years. So I really appreciate for you to listening, and I know sometimes you can just ask me questions and not privately, because if you have anything to ask, there isn't really time anymore. 5 minutes to go, and some. Okay. Well, I think the part in coming to the United States, and that was, it's rough. I'll just tell you this much. When I went to Bowling Green, the high school I went to here, it was a farm community, and I didn't really get the real great education. So I'm in college, and I'm in trouble. So there was a beautiful chapel there in Bowling Green, unlocked. I prayed for 2 years. Every day I prayed there. And I got through college. At the end of 2 years, I was fine. And the same is also, how did I find God again? When the war was over, somehow my mother didn't watch me every minute, and I just went to a Catholic church. And of course, remember, it was in Latin, which I didn't know, and everybody was crossing themselves, and I wasn't used to doing that. But I felt God was there. It was all men. They were all these men from other countries who had been sent there. And I just felt God was there. And then I remembered that He had looked after us, and we survived. And sometimes when you're a child, it's hard to remember everything, to thank for everything. But I must say, I've taken a lot of Bible studies since COVID. And I was free in here, and I go to the senior center, and all of a sudden I really understand everything so much better than I did then. I just wasn't as grateful as I should have been. And God's really done wonders for me and for my family. And unfortunately, we just lost our best man the other day. And of course, I'm the only one surviving. When you're 92, everybody around you is gone. But I must say, I'm very grateful to many of you who are my friends, my young friends. And I say young friends, well, yeah, when you're in the 60s, you're young friends. So, you're young enough to be my children. So anybody, I'm for hire. Anybody needs a grandmother, I'm it. And so anyhow, so thank you so much for listening, and thank you. Thanks.
What year did you come to the States?
49, the 10 years, lost childhood. Yeah. Then I found it February 27, 1949. And everybody was seasick, just about, but not me. I'd never been seasick. I couldn't give up the good food. We hadn't had good food like this, so it was great. Yeah.
Were you married before you came here?
Oh, no. I was just a kid. Oh, no. I was 16.
Oh, back then.
No, 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 not in Estonia. People didn't get married that young. No, no. I met my husband in college in Bowling Green. At that time, all the women met their husbands in college. That's what we did, and so, you know, it was just the thing you did, and whether you wanted to or not, you always met your husband there, or wife, you know. So anyhow, so oh, there's your son, yeah, yeah. So anyhow, oh my goodness, oh sweetheart, thank you. I want to see you.
So appreciated.
Yes, yes, thank you. Thank you, it was very sweet.